Now, I just want to tell you that in the next few minutes, we are expecting to hear from the leader of the militant group Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, expected to speak very shortly after 37 people is the latest figure. 37 people died after those attacks on pagers and walkie-talkies in Lebanon. Thousands of people have been injured. Hezbollah has blamed Israel. There are fears the conflict could spread. This is the scene live on the Lebanese border right now. Israel has said a new phase of the war with Hezbollah is about to open. So we are going to be hearing from Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, very shortly. We'll bring you that here on BBC News, so do stay with us.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Funerals are held for Hezbollah fighters killed in 2 days of exploding device attacks across Lebanon. At least 37 people have been killed and thousands more have been injured. The Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is due to give a televised address shortly. The Iran-backed group has previously promised just punishment for the attacks. It comes as Israel says it started a new phase in the war and moves troops from Gaza to the north of Israel. Hello and welcome to BBC News. If you're just joining us, we are expecting to hear from the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in the next few minutes. His first response after 2 days of attacks in Lebanon using sabotage pagers and walkie-talkies, a campaign widely believed to have been carried out by Israel's spy agency Mossad. 12 people were killed and nearly 3,000 injured on Tuesday. Yesterday, 25 people were killed and 600 people were injured in a second wave of blasts. Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran and is prescribed as a terrorist group by the US, UK and Western governments, has promised to retaliate. Fears of an all-out war are mounting. Israel announced yesterday that they've moved to a new phase in this war. The stakes could not be much higher. Well, on today's programme, we'll hear exactly how Hezbollah's leader responds. Our teams in the BBC newsroom, as you can see, are monitoring that. Our specialist correspondents will provide context and analysis. Frank Gardner, our security correspondent, is with me. So is our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale. Daniel De Simone is our correspondent in Jerusalem. Bronwyn Maddox from Chatham House is also with us. She's just back from Israel's northern border. We'll also hear from Malcolm Nance, who's a former US Navy counter-terrorism expert. He is in New York. We'll also be getting live reaction throughout the next few hours from Beirut. Well, before all of that, let's start this hour with this report from Hugo Bachega. Let me also bring in our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, and also James Landale, our diplomatic correspondent, who's going to be with me through the next hour or so. Frank, to you first of all. Hezbollah has promised retaliation, so all eyes on Hassan Nasrallah and what he might say. Interesting what you were saying right at the start of this, that expect fiery language, expect propaganda, expect all of those things. And just in the last few minutes, Hezbollah's chief saying what happened did not impact our command control or infrastructure, but just about every analysts would dispute that given what we've seen over the last couple of days. So exactly as Frank and James were saying, in a sense, quite a lot of this is messaging to various people in Hezbollah about their resilience. But let's go back to Jerusalem and back to our correspondent Daniel Simone, who is there. Daniel, let me ask you, because there have been significant developments there in Israel over the last couple of days with, first of all, Benjamin Netanyahu announcing a new war aim to the north of Israel. Then we had the defense minister say they were entering a new phase of the war. We've also seen troop movements. Give me an idea of the public mood, the public support or otherwise for all of that. Frank, thank you for being with me. James, thank you for being with me for the last hour. Frank, I know you're going to stay. I just want to end this hour by taking you back and showing those live pictures, because Hassan Nasrallah continues to make that statement. We are monitoring all the times, our various teams. We'll be back to that here in the next few moments. So don't go away. Much more reaction to what we're hearing with those attacks on Lebanon and the response from Hezbollah's leader. Live from London, this is BBC News. Hezbollah's leader accuses Israel of crossing all red lines by detonating thousands of devices across Lebanon, calling the attacks, in which 37 people were killed, a declaration of war. Israel's military announces fresh strikes against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, saying it's bringing security to northern Israel. One other headline, the BBC reveals the former Harrods boss, the late Mohammed Al-Fayed, has been accused of rape by 5 female ex-employees. Hello and welcome to BBC News. In the last hour, we've been monitoring a speech from the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, giving his first public response to 2 days of attacks in Lebanon using sabotage communication devices. The number of people killed has now risen to 37, with over 3,000 people wounded. In a moment or two, I'll talk once again to our security correspondent Frank Gardner, but let me tell you a little more about what Hezbollah's leader has been saying, because he accused Israel of being behind that operation over the last couple of days, which he said crossed all red lines. Well, that is still going on. We are monitoring that all the time with our teams inside the newsroom. But Frank Gardner, our security correspondent, has been with me through the last hour, monitoring what the Hezbollah leader has been saying. Worth just underlining, Hezbollah, of course, a prescribed terrorist group by the UK, US and other Western governments. But what have you picked out so far? Dr. H.A. Hellier, we have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us here on today's programme here on BBC News. We'll have plenty more on this story, which has dominated the last hour and a half, but we'll also turn to some of the other stories making the headlines here in just a moment or two. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. We have been concentrating for the last hour and 20 minutes on Hezbollah's chief giving that statement, his first official response to those explosions we've seen in Lebanon over the last 2 days, which have killed 37 people, injured thousands. Worth going through and recapping, if you're just joining us here, some of the key lines that has come from that statement, because Hassan Nasrallah accusing Israel of crossing all the red lines, but acknowledging that those explosions with those communication devices, that the group had suffered a major and unprecedented blow. Sarah, thank you very much for being with us. We're coming to the end of this particular section of the programme, so I have to leave it there, but a really graphic account of what it actually feels like they're living through all of this in Beirut the last couple of days. And interesting, Sarah, just describing how different it actually felt despite everything that has been going on over the last 12 months. We're going to take a pause. I'll have more on that story, also the rest of all of the headline stories here on BBC News. We'll also have the day's business news coming up. All of that here on BBC News in the next few moments. Don't go away.
Caution at the Bank of England. It keeps interest rates on hold, but the governor tells us they're optimistic that borrowing costs are on the path down. On Wall Street, though, the party is back on. Shares hit a new record high as the Fed says the economy is in a good place, despite its jumbo cut in rates. And billion-dollar breaks. Australia's economy rides a wave of interest in surfing. But is the government fully on board with protecting the sport? All those puns to come a little later in the programme. This is Business Today. Welcome to you. Now we're going to start with the story of the day here in the UK, where the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has said that interest rates are now gradually on the path down. That's despite the bank's decision to keep the cost of borrowing on hold today. We're going to keep the music going because it's so great. The bank's main rate was left at 5% after it was cut last month for the first time in more than 4 years. Now the bank ratcheted up interest rates to try and control inflation. It hit a peak of 11.1% back in 2022. Oh, it feels quiet now, doesn't it? Looks nice, doesn't it? That is your business today. You are up to date. Much more on the website, bbc.com/business. See you very soon. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to BBC News. Straight to breaking news. It concerns the late Mohammed Al-Fayed. A statement from Scotland Yard. Let me read what they've said. They say they are aware of, quote, various allegations of sexual offences made against Mohammed Al-Fayed over a number of years. Commander Southworth from the Met said, we are aware of those allegations made against the late Mohammed Al-Fayed, which were reported to the Met. Each one was investigated, and where appropriate, advice from the Crown Prosecution Service was sought. No charges resulted from these investigations. Got across the line, and in the meantime we've seen Israel open up that new phase of the war, talking about northern Israel. And of course, over Tuesday and Wednesday we saw those explosive devices going off in Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah but impacting civilians as well. The pictures over Beirut, apologies, that locator is wrong, but these are the pictures over Beirut because we had Israeli jets flying over Beirut a little earlier at the start of Hezbollah's leader making his first official comment, warning again that there will be retaliatory action, but acknowledging the blow that those explosive devices has had on the organisation. So we will have plenty more on that story and the rest of today's main stories here on today's Verified Live. That's here in just a moment. Don't go away. Live from London, this is BBC News. Hezbollah's leader accuses Israel of crossing all red lines by detonating thousands of devices across Lebanon, calling the attacks in which 37 people were killed a declaration of war.
As expected, there was some strong words against Israel and the promise of a harsh punishment, but again, indications that Hezbollah is not interested in an escalation in this conflict.
Israel's military announces fresh strikes against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, saying it's bringing security to northern Israel. We'll have reaction to all the latest developments. We'll get analysis from our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. In other news, the BBC reveals the former Harrods boss, the late Mohammed Al-Fayed, has been accused of rape by 5 female ex-employees. The Metropolitan Police says it's aware of the allegations. And the Bank of England governor says interest rates are now gradually on the path down after borrowing costs were held at 5%. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. The Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has given his first public response to 2 days of attacks in Lebanon using sabotage communication devices. He described the attacks as an unprecedented blow to the Iran-backed militant group, but vowed to continue to fight Israel. The number of people killed by exploding pagers and walkie-talkies has risen to 37, with over 3,000 people wounded. The Hezbollah leader said the operation crossed all red lines. Hugo, live for us there in Beirut. Thanks very much. Let's continue with this with our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's here with me. Lise, it was fascinating listening to the different stages of Hassan Nasrallah talking there. How weakened is Hezbollah, do you think? Lise Doucette, thanks very much. It was interesting. We were listening there to Antony Blinken talking about his latest diplomatic efforts. I was talking to Dr. H.A. Hellier, who's a senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, very critical of the US approach over the last few weeks and months. And he said that Israel continues to cross a number of red lines. More of the day's main stories in a moment around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News now. The BBC has revealed that the late Mohammed Al-Fayed, the former owner of Harrods, the UK's largest luxury department store, has been accused of rape by 5 female ex-employees. The Egyptian-born businessman rose from a poor family in Alexandria to buying the world-famous department store in 1985. A BBC documentary has uncovered evidence that under Mohammed Al-Fayed's ownership, Harrods not only failed to intervene but helped to cover up abuse allegations. This report from Shaima Khalil contains descriptions of sexual violence. That nearly brings us to the end of this particular half hour. Worth going back to our main stories because throughout the course of the afternoon, these are pictures from Beirut. We've heard from Hezbollah's leader talking for the first time his response to those explosions of those pager devices over the last 2 days that have killed 37 people and injured thousands more. He has promised again to retaliate against Israel, saying all the red lines had been crossed. The diplomacy continues in the hope of de-escalating the situation, but a very dangerous situation in the Middle East. More here in just a moment or two. You're watching BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. Hezbollah's leader accuses Israel of crossing all red lines by detonating thousands of devices across Lebanon, calling the attacks in which 37 people were killed as a declaration of war. Israel's military announces fresh strikes against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, saying it's bringing security to northern Israel. In other news, the BBC reveals the former Harrods boss, the late Mohammed Al-Fayed, has been accused of rape by 5 female ex-employees. The Metropolitan Police says it's aware of the allegations. And the Bank of England governor says interest rates are now gradually on the path down after borrowing costs were held at 5%. Well, we'll have more on all of those stories coming up. First, though, let's catch up with the sport headlines. Sarah McCurrans is there. And Sarah, good evening.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Let's start then with the cricket at Trent Bridge, where Australia are chasing 316 to beat England. Plenty more on the BBC Sport website and app, but that is it for me for the moment.
Sarah, great stuff. Thanks very much. I was just bringing you the latest a few moments ago about the European flooding we've seen throughout the course of the week. Let me tell you, the EU chief has just announced $11 billion for countries hit by what she has said are heartbreaking floods. So a large amount of EU support for all of those countries that have been hit by those devastating floods. That news just coming into us. Let's turn to politics here, though, now, because more scrutiny on the Prime Minister Keir Starmer's expenses and willingness to accept gifts after it emerged earlier in the week that a wealthy donor had paid for clothes for his wife, Victoria. Let's go straight to our political correspondent, Leila Nathu, who's in Westminster for us. And Leila, he was asked, I know, about Arsenal because he's a big Arsenal fan and watching, but that is part of the 100,000 or so that has had so much scrutiny. So tell me more about that particular exchange. Let me close the programme where we started, that major story in Lebanon. I'll show you the pictures live from Beirut as the Foreign Office advises foreign nationals to leave Lebanon while commercial flights are still operation as tension remains incredibly heightened across the Middle East. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Hello there, good afternoon. Well, it's still warm and